Shalom Talmudim. It is time to go over Psalm 15. We obviously didn't have time to do it in class, but that's what these video lectures are for. So we're going to go through Psalm 15 pretty quickly here, if possible, and just point out a few things that may or may not be obvious to you. So hopefully this will be helpful as you prepare for the midterm. It is quite likely that possibly at least one of these verses from Psalm 15 would show up on the midterm to translate. So it's helpful to know these verses. So first verse here of Psalm 15, Mizmor LeDavid. So a Psalm of David. That's typically how you have a Psalm of David phrase, Mizmor LeDavid. But you could also have that LaAsaph, LaShlomo, of Solomon, of Asaph, etc. So this is typically a superscript in our English Bibles. It'll be in italics right next to the chapter marker. And, well, in Hebrew at least, it's treated as an inspired part of the text, and I think that we ought to treat it that way. So anyway, that being said, a Psalm of David, and then the psalm proper starts with Yahweh. So this is an address. We call it a vocative, so we usually put O in front of that. So, O Lord would be appropriate. So, O Lord or O Yahweh, mi yagur b'oholecha. So, who, and then this is just a normal form. It's a jelly donut, but the word is gur, to sojourn. So yagur should show you, because of the prefix, that it's the imperfect 3ms form of the call for sojourn. So who, and then we nuance it based on the context. You could say who will sojourn, or who can sojourn would be even more appropriate here. So who can sojourn? B'oholecha. So ohel comes from ohel here, and then the bait preposition in, and then the 2ms suffix. So who can sojourn in your tent? And then that's the first phrase, who can sojourn in your tent, O Lord, who can sojourn in your tent? And then the next phrase, who, me, who Yishkon. Yishkon comes from shakan. It's a call imperfect 3ms. Who can dwell? Bahar, in the hill of, so this is in construct here, Bahar, in the hill of Kodeshecha. Kodshecha. Who can dwell in the hill of your holiness is how we would translate that, the hill of your holiness. Now, normally, these constructions, English usually will just translate it as your holy hill, and that's fine. But if you have in the hill of your holiness, that's fine. This phrase goes together talking about the God's holiness related to this mountain. So usually we talk about it as holy mountain, holy hill, but hill of your holiness is fine too. You have a pronominal suffix there. This is a shortened form of Kodesh, which is the word for holiness. So the hill of your holiness. So in Psalms, you have typically parallel phrases. So it's called line A, line B. And when you go through a psalm or a proverb or any Hebrew poetry, the sections are related. So you can hear that it's very similar. O Lord, who can sojourn in your tent? Who can dwell in your holy hill? It's essentially asking the same question. It's just asking it in a different way, putting a little different emphasis, sure. But that's why translating psalms are often fun, because the idea of dwelling and sojourning are actually related. And so if you don't know what a vocabulary word is, but you know what one of them are, then you can just guess and say, oh, it's got to be something like sojourning or something like residing, something along those lines. And so you have it. It's translating poetry is a little bit easier because of that purpose. Now the grammar is a little more apocopated. There aren't as many connectors or it doesn't flow as regularly as narratives. So you give and take. All right, verse 2. Now, here what we have is a pretty readily identifiable participle. You should recognize that. Holek. It sounds very similar, holek, to what we've been using. And holek, it has the O class, the full letter holum, between the he and the lamed. And now there's no pronoun around it. And so what this is telling us is that this is a substantival use of the participle. So this is the answer to the question. The question is, who can dwell in your holy hill? And the answer is substantively, and the way we translate substantival participles are often he who, or she who, or he who does this, or she who does that, or the one who does this. So you could translate it any one of those ways. You could translate it the one who walks. So that's how I'm going to translate it here. The one who walks tamim. The one who walks blameless. Now, in order to get that exactly right, you might make it an adverb. That's okay. So the one who walks blameless, or the one who walks blamelessly, that's the point. The one who walks blameless or walks blamelessly. And here's another participle, the OA pattern. That's what should stand out for the participle here. Pa'al, to do, make. And so the one who walks blamelessly and the one who does tzedek, righteousness. So the one who walks blamelessly and the one who does righteousness. Now the participle, this is where the exegetical nuance is significant. Participles, you could have just used finite verbs, but the participles are communicating the continual nuance. So the one who is marked by continually doing these things. In other words, it's not just oh, you did this on a Friday, and so therefore now you are able to enter. No, it's your life is marked by the continual nuance of this, and that's why the participles are used. And so it's very clear in Hebrew that this is a lifestyle, not just something that you did once upon a time, or that it's over now. So the one who walks blamelessly and who does righteousness, and a third participle here, the OA, so davar, to speak. So the one who speaks, emet. The one who speaks emet, from the Aleph with Beth videos, we know that that's truth. The one who speaks truth, bil vavo. So hopefully you recognize the pronominal suffix and the bait prepositions. So then you have levav there. And so that's heart. So in his heart. So the one who speaks truth in his heart. In other words, it's not just something that is spoken but doesn't have meaning, but it actually comes from who this individual is. In his heart, he speaks truth. So what he says coincides with who he is on the inside. Truth meets his soul, as it were. So the one who walks blamelessly, the one who does righteousness, and the one who speaks truth in his heart. That is the one who can enter into the holy hill. Everything else is pretty straightforward. You just have the three participles there, and holek, poel, and dover, and those are participles which mark that continual action. All right, then verse 3. This is a little longer of a verse and some interesting things going on. So you have, throughout this verse and the next verse, you have a flexibility of the all preposition. So we know that is on or upon, but it can mean concerning or against as well. So it can have that logical nuance. So ragal is a verb which means to walk. It's related to regel, which is the word for foot. Exactly. Well done. Well done. I like how you chipped in there and contributed to this video. So regel is the word for foot, and so ragal is literally to walk, but it can also idiomatically mean to slander. So many translations are going to translate it as slander, but here just literally he does not. So lo is the negation though. So he does not, and here's the other thing is typically we translate perfect verbs. This is called perfect 3ms, and we typically translate past tense, but in poetry, the perfect verbs normally just communicate habitual, something that you are identified holistically with your life. That's where you get the perspective view. So it's maybe not the worst thing to translate it as a past tense, but most English translations aren't going to do that because it's talking about viewing your life holistically, not just a past occurrence. So he does not is probably a better translation in the Psalms, in poetry. So he does not walk concerning his tongue. Well, what does that mean? Like I said, this becomes an idiom for slander. So you could translate, he does not slander concerning his tongue. So, or with his tongue, perhaps you could translate it in this instance. This comes from lashon. We had that on the quiz, I think, on just this last Tuesday. And then the 3ms pronouns. So his tongue, lashon, lashono. Lashon becomes lashono. So he does not slander with his tongue. And then the next phrase here, by the way, this little diamond tells you there's like a comma there, essentially. That's what that's functioning as. And so this next phrase then, he does not do le re'ehu. So who is the 3ms? Who is he? So to his neighbor. So he does not do to his neighbor or to his friend ra'ah. He does not do evil to his neighbor. That's kind. That's important. And then the little wishbone thing tells you this is the halfway point to the verse. So he does not slander with his tongue, and he does not do evil to his neighbor or to his friend. And then you also, I should say, with regard to the division here, that's the normal, the wishbone is the normal way of marking where you have the division between line A and line B. So that's typically how it works. And so line B starts now. And the v'cherpa, the reproach, he does not lift up against karovo. So karov is the word for near, and so it's substantival in a sense where the near one, his near one. So he doesn't lift up a reproach against his near one, which could be a relative. It could be, in this case, because of the relationship between the lines, it's someone who's similar to his friend. So he doesn't do evil to his friend or his neighbor, and he doesn't lift up a reproach, bring something, an insult or a reproach against his neighbor or the one who is near to him, the karov. And then the 3ms is telling you it's his near one. So literally, he does not lift up a reproach, or a reproach he does not lift up concerning his near one. That's how you would translate that. So altogether, it's he does not slander with his tongue, he does not do to his neighbor evil, and a reproach he does not lift up against his near one, or concerning his near one. All right, then verse 4. By the way, for the verbs, all these verbs are relatively easy, right? This is a call perfect 3ms for ragal. Asa is call perfect 3ms. You have nasa, call perfect 3ms. So the parsing on this verse, wow, I tell you what, you probably felt like you were a Hebrew expert in translating this verse with the verbs at least. Hopefully you're able to figure out the suffixes and everything on this. But it's nice when you have that going on. Now this verse was probably much more difficult because you have a couple Nifal things going on, as well as a weird Hifil thing going on. So basically these are Nifal participles. Now I told you that that's going to be one of the very last things we talk about, but in essence, the Nifal participle is marked by the kamates underneath the second, or a segol, depending on if it's a third hey verb, it'll take a segol. Now, normally, if it was a call imperfect 1CP, is going to have an O class. So nizo, nishmor, but nishmar is the Nifal perfect with a patak, but the kamates and segol are participles. Now, the reason that the participles are important here is because their Nifal is passive, and Nifal participles are in this context, because there's no pronoun and everything, they're substantival again. So what that means is you translate he who is or the one who is. So in this case, the one who is despised, that comes from baza. So the one who is despised in his eyes, the his there is referring to the one that's been being described in this psalm. So the one who is despised in his eyes, you have to have implied is after this, is rejected. Ma'as. So it's talking about a state of being here. So in other words, the one who is despised or contemptible, the one who is acting in a way against God's law, the one who is despised in his eyes is rejected. So in other words, it's a passive way of saying what we would say in the active sense. He rejects the one who is despised, who is corruptible, contemptible. So that's usually how English translations will translate it. But literally it says the one who's in this state of being despised because of what they're doing, in his eyes, he rejects. So it's not just saying his standard is, I just reject whoever I want. No, it's the one who's despicable, the one who's despised according to the standard of the law. He is rejected and not accepted by this man of God. But in contrast, now you have the vav here signaling a contrast. So, but, notice the direct object marker here. So the verb comes later, putting this and this as close together to compare. So the ones who are despised are rejected. But notice the tsere yod. What's the tsere yod but a marker of the plural construct. So this comes from yare, which is the adjective for fear, but it's used substantively as well as the participle. So those who fear Yahweh. But those who fear Yahweh, being plural because of the a ending, the yireh, so those who fear Yahweh, he honors. Now this is a PL verb. It's purple, red, green, so it's PL, 3MS. So the reason the PL is important is because a PL is a causative stative verb, meaning he puts them into a state of honor. So in other words, he takes appropriate causative action to ensure that they are in a state of honor. That's what it's talking about. So we'll learn more about the nuances of the stem as we go. We're just trying to right now make sure we know how we know what is going on with the verbs. And so the purple, red, green tells you what this is. You also have the dogation, the second root letter, which is always it's often a confirmation for you that it's the PL. Unless there's a guttural, it will reject the dogation then, and there won't be one. But that should be easily parsed as a PL. So he honors, puts in a state of honor those who fear Yahweh. So he rejects those who are despised. They are rejected. But those who fear the Lord, he honors. And then you have this last phrase here after the wishbone. So this is line B. And so nishba. Notice nishba. What does that sound like? Nifal. So nifal. This is a nifal. And you see the patak there, which shows you that this is not a participle, but it's a 3ms nifal, from shava, to swear, to take an oath. And that verb normally shows up as a nifal because a nifal can also, when you take an oath, it's something that you act upon yourself. And so that's part of why it's a nifal. So he swears, he takes an oath, and then these next two verbs are tricky. So this comes from ra'ah, which normally when you have two letters back to back, one of them ends up dropping out. And what we recognize is that the hey is added on there too to mark the hifil. Now, the fact that there's a lamed preposition on there tells you whenever there's a preposition on a verbal, you know that it's an infinitive construct. So he swears to cause harm. Now you might be like, what in the world? He swears to cause harm. Now, if you don't understand all of how the hifil infinitive works, don't worry about it. The simple rule is that the hey gets thrown on the beginning, and a lot of times you have the lamed preposition before it. It's going to look very similar to a normal Nifal 3ms, and context will have to determine it, but that's why a lot of times the preposition is thrown on there to make it really easy that we're dealing with an infinitive. So he swears to cause harm. What does that mean? He swears and he sticks with that oath to the point of harm. His own harm is usually the understanding here, because I think that is appropriate. He's not obviously going to be looking to harm other people. This is the one who's entering into the holy place of the Lord. So he's not hurting other people. So usually it's translated as he swears to his own hurt. And then the last phrase here, velo yamir, and he does not change is how we translate that. So he swears to his own hurt, or he swears to hurt and not change. He doesn't change. So this is another weird one. Yamir, we'll talk more about these as we investigate jelly donut patterns, but it's from mur, jelly donut, to change. And basically obviously, well, this is part of the thing that I was just mentioning very briefly, and I talked to some of you in the groups about this, is that when you have something drop out, like in this case you had a letter drop out, the shurik, jelly donuts typically will drop out. But when something drops out, the purple color in the pattern will often drop out. So notice here you have red, green. So the Nifal pattern is normally red, purple, green. But because letter dropped out and the syllables have shifted, now there's one less syllable involved. The shava then loses its place, and so now it's red. Purple's dropped out and green, so it's just red, green. So that's going to seem really complicated to some of you and be like, wow, how am I going to remember that or recognize that? Don't worry about that right now. There's actually way easier ways to recognize that, because there's no verbs that just have a hierik underneath the letter like that. So this hierik is a shortened form of the hierik yod, which is a normal part of the Nifal. So normally you're going to be able to recognize jelly donuts by the infixed hierik yod, and in this case it's just a hierik, but no other verbs just take the hierik that way. So that's actually the easier way to recognize these jelly donut verbs, is that the E class vowel, the IE with the hierik yod for the Nifal. So he does not change. He does not cause change to come about. He's faithful to what he has promised to do. That's somebody who's entering the place of God. All right, verse 5 then, and this is the last verse of Psalm 15. So kaspo, his silver he does not give. So that's his silver or his money. So his money he does not give. Beneshek. So neshek is the word for interest. So he does not give his money. In English, we don't say in interest necessarily. We say at interest or for interest usually. But you could say he does not his money he does not give in interest. That's fine. And then the next phrase there, and a bribe, concerning the innocent, or against the innocent probably in this instance. So a bribe against Naki, the innocent, shochad al Naki lo lakach, he does not take. So he does not take a bribe against the innocent or the blameless. He does not, and again, the parsing on these is pretty easy. It's just call perfect 3ms for all these verbs, because it's just talking about the normal character. And so a bribe against the innocent he does not take. And then you have a break here. This accent tells you a break, and then the next one says the one who does these things. So this is a participle. Ose, can you see? Yes. Bring out the American national anthem. So ose, can you see? It's a participle. So again, it's a substantive. as many of the Psalms participles are. So the one who does ele, these, so the one who does these things, lo yemot. This is the word for stumbling because you stumble in motes. So stumble or falter. So the one who does these things will not stumble. Olam. Olam is the word for forever. So he will not stumble forever. The one who does these things will not stumble or totter forever. So the point being, and it's cool, by the way, you have a full psalm translated now if you've done all these. And I encourage you to read over this psalm periodically, even if you make it your devotions. Just read a verse in Hebrew from this psalm. Just internalize it. Keep working on it because it's really beautiful. Just meditating on all these precepts, and little by little, your grammatical awareness will grow, and you'll be able to glean more insights and observe things that you haven't observed before. And that's what it's all about. So hopefully that's helpful as we walk through Psalm 15. And Lord willing, we will be able to do some more parsing and hit Psalm 24 in class this next week. All right, we will see you then, Lord willing.